Hey everyone, I'm sure you're well aware that as of November 1st, people who receive SNAP will not receive them for the month of November, which will put many people who are already facing a certain level of food insecurity, will raise them up to face even more food insecurity. And the estimates are that this will affect 43 million people in the United States that will be unable to get food, at least the way they used to. They'll be going to food banks and other things. But then also where I live in the Middle Tennessee area, it is estimated that it'll be over 60,000 people who are going to be impacted by this. And this is all because of the government shutdown, which is a whole nother topic to talk about. But I want to talk about what's going on with SNAP and really the a sadness that I feel in my heart, not just for the people affected by this, but the response of so many Christian leaders and Christian influencers. First and foremost, let me say up front that by law, undocumented people do not qualify for SNAP, for any type of food assistance or welfare or anything really. And so I want to read you something that come from that I got off of one of many websites that deal with immigration law. And here's what this particular website said. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program at SNAP offers food assistance to low-income individuals and families. While the program aims to combat food insecurity, eligibility for non-citizens involves specific and often complex rules. Understanding these distinctions is important for those seeking to determine their potential to receive benefits. Undocumented immigrants are not eligible to receive SNAP benefits. Federal law, the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008, so this was a long time ago. This is not something that Biden did or Obama did or even Trump did. This predates all of those people. So the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008 limits SNAP eligibility to U.S. citizens and certain lawfully present non-citizens. Many non-citizens lawfully present in the United States may be eligible for SNAP if they meet certain criteria. Again, undocumented people do not receive SNAP. Certain qualifying lawful non-residents could under certain circumstances. These individuals are referred to as qualified non-citizens. Categories include lawful permanent residents, also known as green card holders, refugees, asylees, victims of human trafficking holding a T visa, Cuban Haitian entrants, individuals granted withholding of deportation or removal. And so in some circumstances, a qualified non-citizen can receive a SNAP, but undocumented people cannot. Some qualified non-citizens, such as refugees, asylees, and those granted withholding of deportation, are immediately eligible for SNAP benefits without a waiting period. Many lawful permanent residents must reside in the U.S. as a qualified non-citizen for 5 years before becoming eligible for SNAP. And so this myth going around really that all these undocumented immigrants are getting a SNAP is just not true. But here's some other things to know about SNAP. According to the USDA, 88% of all SNAP participants are children, the elderly, and non-elderly adults with a disability. So this idea that everybody on SNAP is healthy people who could just go get a job, again, is just not true. The majority, 80% of people on SNAP are children, the elderly, and the non-elderly who have a disability. 90% of SNAP recipients are U.S. born citizens. 70% of SNAP recipients work full time. So instead of getting upset with SNAP recipients, you should be upset with businesses not paying a livable wage. Now, what is a livable wage? Well, that's calculated for every county about how much money you would have to make per hour to live in that county based on no children, up to a family of five, one adult, two adult, all kinds of variables. But based on those things, in order to live in that particular county without receiving any type of assistance, either from family members or the government or churches, without any assistance, in order to be completely self-sufficient, this is how much you would have to make an hour. Now, where I live in Franklin, Tennessee, Williamson County, a family of four that includes two adults and two children. In that family of four, if only one adult is working, the livable wage is, get this, $44.02 an hour is how much you'd have to make. $44.02 an hour for a family of four with one adult working. In a family of four with two children and two adults and both adults working, then each adult would need to make $26.46 an hour in order to live in this county and this city without receiving any help. The minimum wage in Tennessee is $7.25. Now, what is disheartening to me is the number of Christian leaders and Christian influencers who are calling for a complete end of SNAP. And on social media, I have seen some just really, really disturbing comments from people who I used to respect. Comments that just say every person on SNAP, we just need to get rid of the program altogether. You need to be working if you're on SNAP, when we just told you that majority of people on SNAP would not be able to work. And all of this is done in the name of Christ. Now, the same Christians calling for an end to the SNAP program are the same people who want the United States to be a Christian nation. Now, how odd is that? We're a Christian nation, but yet let's not feed the poor from the government perspective. Too many Christians are more committed to capitalism than they are the gospel of Jesus Christ. All the Old Testament prophets judged the nation for not taking care of the poor. In the Old Testament, the prophets were getting on to the government for not having programs that take care of the poor. For an example, the prophet Ezekiel said this in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. I want you to listen to it carefully, because the prophet Ezekiel is going to tell us what the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was. The prophet Ezekiel is going to tell us what sodomy is. And here is what the prophet Ezekiel says about Sodom and Gomorrah. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. Now, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters, which would include Gomorrah, were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. That is why God judged Sodom and Gomorrah, because they did not help the poor and the needy. But then Jesus himself, in his parable of the sheep and the goats, which was given to all nations, it says when all the nations of the world are gathered together, then God is going to separate the sheep from the goats. And so Jesus says what makes you a sheep, a follower of Jesus, and what separates you from the goats, people who may claim to be Christians but aren't really. What separates you, among other things, is this. Here's what Jesus said. You're a sheep. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. That's not just to individuals, but that's for the country as well. People say, yeah, but Kevin, the government shouldn't be doing this. This is the church's responsibility. And I wholeheartedly agree with you about that. The problem is, and please don't take offense to this, the church just isn't doing it. Let me just give you this example. Between the years 1933 and 1938 in the United States, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt put these social welfare programs into place that's called the New Deal. Now, in the United States, before the 1930s, if a person had a need in the community, who would they go to? Well, they would go to their family, but then they would go to the churches. And so it was churches who were taking care of the poor. It was churches who were ministering to the prisoner. It was churches who were starting hospitals. It was churches who were starting schools. So in the community, when people needed assistance, they would go to the church. But then one of the unintended consequences of the New Deal was by the time you get to the late 1930s, early 1940s, all of a sudden, if a person has a need in the community or in the community they have a need, they no longer go to the church, they look to the government for help. Are you following me? There was a time in our country when people looked to the church for help. But through the New Deal, people started looking to the government. And just to be honest, the churches started to become irrelevant. But then, what are the churches going to do with all this money that they used to give to helping people? But now the government's doing that. So now they have all this money. What do they do with all that money? Well, in the 1940s, there was a movement that started in churches that continues to today, and that movement is known as the church growth movement, where churches started taking business principles and applying them to how to grow the church. And then all of that money they used to spend on social issues, they turned inward in that money and started building bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger buildings. To now, by the time you get to the late 1990s, continuing today, you have the megachurch movement. Now, I'm not meaning to sound judgmental, but what I'm saying is because these churches do a lot of good. And larger churches do a lot of good with the resources they have, but the majority of their resources go into building and maintaining buildings while people around their churches are living in poverty and will soon lose their SNAP benefits. So yes, the churches need to be doing this, but in reality, they're not. And this is just the food insecurity. Our church works extensively in homeless ministry and housing ministry. We have our own housing programs. These housing programs are grant funded. And there's a whole nother story I could tell you about that, why we went the grant route instead of the church route on this. We spend on average $30,000 a month um, in rental assistance, subsidizing people's rent. Right now, it's food insecurity. But if this shutdown keeps going, it could affect housing. And the big, beautiful bill budget has tremendous changes coming through HUD, which is where we're funded through, and how those resources are to be used. So people that we have housed, if this keeps going, will be back on the street homeless. Will the churches step up then and help subsidize rent? I was watching a thing on the news last night where you could get a list of what food ministries need. And I think the one I saw on the news was Second Harvest, and they had a list where they were making up, if you bought one item of everything that goes in a box that they're giving out, and I'm very thankful for this. It would cost you about $22, $23 to purchase one item of all the things on that, of all the things on that list. You just purchase one of each, about $23. And so everybody can do that. But what's going to happen when it's, in order to keep this family housed, this one family is going to need $1,500.